My name is Xavier Flores. I am the interviewer for this interview.
My name is Antonio Garcia, and I'm helping Xavier with questions.
I am Manuel Martinez, and I am the film taker.
My name is John Kamperschroer. I'm one of the privileged to be here today.
And I'm the Commander Ed Slovak from southeastern Wisconsin, Chapter 227. Happy to be here with all of you and enjoyed it very much today. Okay, well, we'll get this started. I'm Ed Slovak. I'm the Commander of the Korean War Veterans Association, southeastern Wisconsin. And our organization was started in 2001, or 2011, or 2001. And it was at that time that we gathered all the Korean War vets from our community, and we got them together, and we've been doing well ever since that particular time. And this afternoon, I'm here with John Kamperschroer, and a chapter brother, and he and I are going to expound on our experiences that we had with the 2nd Division and some of the occurrences that we had over the particular time and so on. So we do have some maps over here about the Korean War, different tragedies and stuff like that. We have books that represent all these different things, different segments of the war that would be nice for all of the people to read, our students to read, and all of that. So we're here for that responsibility. As we well know, that we lost around 36,000 members in our particular Korean War experience. When you compare this with the Civil War, I think we were able to have that many casualties in such a short time, in 3 years' time. So it was a very vicious war, and we had 21 nations that were part of the United Nations force, and they all contributed in some particular way to help us during this war. So we're very happy to be here and to answer any questions that we have for today.
So I just have a couple of questions about where and when did you have your service?
I began my service in 1952. I was a consignee or draftee, and didn't join the service, but I was drafted, and I got my summons, and I joined the Army in Minneapolis, Minnesota. From Minneapolis, Minnesota, after taking my oath, I was transferred down to Fort Sheridan, Illinois, and from there, decisions had to be made where they wanted me. My next stop was over at Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri, which is an engineering school in the Army. So I learned how to operate equipment, such things as graders, the Caterpillar, and cranes, shovels, etc. That was the thing. From there, I graduated, and then I went to Korea in September of 1952. I spent the time over there until 53 and separated from service in Colorado, and that was the end of my career.
What branch of the military did you serve?
I was in the Army, United States Army, and I was assigned to the 2nd Division with the Combat Engineers Headquarters and Service Company.
So what were the starting rank that you had, and what did you finish off at after your service? What final rank did you have at the end of your service?
When I got out of the service, I was a staff sergeant. All right, and that was when I came back and completed. So that stuck with me for a long time. I had to spend some time in the reserve or ready reserve, but I didn't serve in any reserve, but there in case they wanted me to call me back.
Did you get to choose your job? Or
Well, they look at your record. And I happened to live in northern Wisconsin on a farm and grew up during that particular time, worked with much machinery on the farm, and I don't know if that was an indication that I was going to be in the engineers, but I guess it suited me quite well.
So how did your military service affect your life as you returned back home?
Well, I believe when you're in the service, when you're in the military, no matter what branch you are in, that gives you a good sense of discipline. And disciplining because they expected you to be an upright citizen serving the country, and not only at home, but overseas.
So, can you share any memories or stories that you had about your time in the military?
Well, there was somewhat of memories because we met with different gentlemen throughout the war, not only in our particular company area, but in areas outside of the company that you had association with other members. And we had our good times, and we had some of our bad times. All right, but in a general rule, we survived.
So how did your communication with your family and friends after you returned back home go?
Well, at that particular time in the 1950s, the only way to converse would be with a telephone. But telephones were not like they are today. We had telephones that were not upright, but we did communicate, but mostly it was letter writing. So I can remember finding a piece of plywood and I put it on my lap, and in the evening we wrote letters to families and to friends and all of that. That was our only way to communicate.
So after your time in the military, what were the any rewards and decorations that you earned throughout your service?
Well, there are many decorations, and for example, there was a good conduct word, always, which is a good one, meaning that you were a good citizen, whether you were away from home or in the military or whatever. Then in the South Korean government gave us their particular medals. So there was about 5 or 6 medals that we had gotten, all right, and the greatest thing of all, I believe, the South Korean government gave us the Peace Medal Award that gave to us, and that was sponsored by the South Korean government, and it was given to all those that served. I received my Peace Medal Award when I went back to Korea in 2004, and I was on a program for the night, and I met a lot of the people from South Korea and got the medal then.
Can you explain the significance behind the necklace that you're wearing around your neck right now? Can you explain what the necklace that you're wearing is right now?
Bolo.
This is a bolo tie that signifies that I belong to the 2nd Division. Now, a lot of different divisions, and it even have them today. All the different divisions have that, to where it's just like a tie, only that it's not a tied tie. It's a bolo tie. And you've seen many pictures of Western movies where they did have the bolo tie with their Western wear. All right, so that signifies to let you know that, yes, I belong to the 2nd Division.
So what was your adult life after the war and after you came back home?
Well, the adult life, when I was discharged in 1953 at Camp Fort Carson, Colorado, that was the time that I took liberty in traveling all the way from Colorado to northern Wisconsin, back to home, getting back into life. And when I got back, a lot of them wanted to know, where were you at? I said I was in the service in Korea, and nobody knew at that particular time about Korea. Where is this place? And all that. But after the war, I was eligible for the GI Bill, get the rights to be a GI Bill rights. So I went back to school in northern Wisconsin to a university in Superior, got my teaching degree, and got into teaching in 1959, and started in the 8th grade and got my degree in 4 through 8, and then I went to various places, southern Wisconsin, ended up in Hales Corners, and finally retired in 1991. But all due to the fact that I got the GI Bill, and that paid for my particular schooling.
So, you live in a time where learning outside of your, everything that was outside of your place was kind of foreign to the people around you. Can you explain the significance of being and serving in Korea and how that affected where you stood in society during your time when you came back to after the war?
Well, I think all of us, when we went into service, we wanted to do our best. Now remember, we were young people at that particular time. I was 22 years old when I entered service, but there are a lot of them that were younger than I was. A lot of 18, 19 years old students or men. And it was significant because we wanted to do a good job. And our job was to defend that particular country over there. And as it turns out, we did do the job because they don't have communism in South Korea as opposed to North Korea. From that point, the feeling was great.
So now that all of this has basically come to you now that you're well aware of everything that's been going on within the world today, what do you think about the overall perspective? What is your overall perspective of everything that you have experienced?
Well, as the saying goes, there's still a lot of problems in the world today. And we do have countries that cannot agree with one another, and they want to eliminate this and they want to eliminate that. All right, that's the whole thing. But it takes all of us, all countries, to work together, hopefully that we can achieve peace no matter where it's at. It takes a lot of work. It's not easy, but it takes both sides to come to some kind of compromise and make some reasonable solution.
So I just want to go back a little bit to your time after the war. Was there any other conflict that you served in afterwards, not even within the war, maybe with other movements that happened, like the Civil Rights Movement or anything after that?
I don't believe so. Not myself, I know that, but there's conflict in the governments and all that. So, but that's something that has to be worked out. It's with the hope of all of us that we can make those things much better, and so on.
Is there any stories that you might have about your experience in the war that you might want to have, what's it called, preserved for basically eternity, that anything that might have happened that you'd want us to know about?
Well, I guess it's just a great feeling that all of us, all of the veterans, were able to get over there, do the thing that we were required of us, and help those people to get to the life that they have now. And that's the greatest thing. So from my point of view.
My name is John Kamperschroer. I originally came from near La Crosse, Wisconsin, a little town called Cashton, and I was raised on a farm. I was the 10th child, the only one that was born in the hospital, because I was 11 pounds, 2 ounces.
So who all lived with you on your childhood home? You said you grew up on a farm, so was there anybody else that lived with you?
My brother went to the Navy, and he trained in the submarine corps, and he spent 26 years in the Navy, 13 of them in the subs.
year were you born?
I was born in 1931.
So during that time, was there any cultural significance around that affected you in any way?
I was born in the year of the Great Depression. Not that it was the 10th baby, but it was the Great Depression. And there wasn't many people that had a lot of things. And we made our toys of pieces of plywood, old baking pans, and made them into trucks. And there wasn't a lot of money.
So living in that time, was there anything that you sort of retained during your childhood that you look back now and you can like see all the effects that it had on you, like as you grew up and to look a better person?
Well, being that I had two brothers in the service, and one was with the MASH hospital, and my brother-in-law also was in the Army, and so that had some influence on me. I watched the news. I listened to the news. We didn't have a TV set at the time. It was one of those things that my dad went out and bought a radio, and my mother was mortified because it cost $35, and we didn't have electricity at the time. So I think that did influence me. Also, we had guys who were coming back from the service and finishing up their high school because they hadn't finished high school, but they got out of the service and they finished high school. Our county was one of the counties that had the least amount of college graduates. I found that when I got in basic training, I and one other guy were the only ones in the whole barracks that had a high school diploma. So that said something to me that and some of these guys, very nice people, but they were guys who some of these guys, you'd say hi, they'd be stuck for an answer. They just, they were conversive. They came from the hills. So I was transferred. I had an enlistment obligation. I signed up to be a plumber in the Navy ships, in the Army ships, I should say. And then when I graduated from the plumbing school, we all got sort of, hey, we got you. You said we'll serve you any place you want. And they sent me to the infantry because they gave our ships to the Navy. So therefore, I went to my sergeant and I said, I want to go down to see the guys down at headquarters at battalion. And this captain said, John, he says, you look like you'd be a good medic. Do you think you would be? He says, your test scores are good. And I said, anything but the infantry. So they put me in the Army medics, and I was there for about 6 months, and we'd practice on each other, bandages, heads and legs and all that stuff. And and then the war broke out. I got there in August 2nd of 1950, and we were not in good shape. We were, if you can see on the map, we were just on a little peninsula at the bottom of Korea there. They called it the Pusan Perimeter. And we were very lucky. My regiment was in reserve, and the other two regiments were being hammered. So they lost a lot of men. But then MacArthur landed at Incheon with all the Marines in the 7th Division, and everybody said, hey, the war's going to be over. Little did they know, the Chinese ambassador had said, if the United States goes across the 38th parallel, we're going to get in the war. MacArthur didn't hear that. And he was bound and determined that he was going to go to the Yellow River. And the Chinese, they came across, and little did we know, we were up in for a great big surprise. Our regiment lost a lot of men. Our other two regiments lost much more. I've got a casualty book that's here, and it shows all the amount of people that we lost. Out of 5,000 people, the 38th Regiment only had like 600 left. They were hit hard.
So during your time in Korea, what were your opinions on MacArthur? Because it seems like there's sort of I guess a resentment towards his, the way that he led, and he tried to go out through the war.
I was just one person with about 40 men. And we didn't have news. Our news came about 7 days late. The Army Times, we didn't have radios, and it was cold. I guess it was, they set up where the Marines were, it was 50 below zero. And I got whole frozen hands, frozen feet, as did a lot of our guys. But I was instructed to get these guys to change their socks every day. They took off their socks. You could wring them out with water. They had 2 pairs on. You put 1 pair under here, 1 pair under here, and do the same thing the next day, because otherwise you freeze your feet. So other than diarrhea and worms, it was more or less status quo until we got into the main fighting. My first few casualties were KIA, killed in action. One guy, as I think I mentioned it to one of you fellows when you were down to see us, that what guy's name was Reyes. And his main objective was to see California. He was killed. He was one of my first casualties. Wow, I must have been creating a lot of wind.
Just to kind of go back, so we can get some details about your childhood and how that experience was as you grew going into your high school life. Can you kind of give us a rundown on what the events went to as the Depression was ending and you transitioned into your high school life?
Out of the 9 children that we had, I had one sister that went on to teacher's college, and one went to Chicago to train as a beautician, and one of my sisters went to Rochester to be trained as a nurse. And my brothers joined the service, and my oldest brother worked on a farm for 8 years for one person. He was getting something like started out at $30 a month, and he got raises up to 60. Well, so when my brothers and sisters left home, he came back to the farm to help my father. I knew I didn't want to be a farmer, so I got this enlistment commitment because I thought plumbers made money. Well, I knew how to sweat pipe, cut pipe, measure pipe, weld, acetylene, electric, and then they pulled the rug off from under me and put me in the infantry. So
can you explain the enlistment process that you went through after you finished high school, and what was the mentality that you had as you made the decision to go into the military?
My friend and I, he was going to go to the Navy, and I wanted to go with him, so my father said he would not sign. So I ended up going into the Army. One of my friends his name is Raymond Briggs, and he was from Paw Paw, Michigan. And he swapped his birth certificate with another guy's birth certificate so he could get in the Army. And he disappeared. His father and mother didn't know where he was. He was in the Army with an alias. So after the war was over, I suggested to my wife that we get all the guys that we can to our house and have a nice reunion. The last guy to show up was Raymond Briggs. And he came down the stairs, and everybody's around my bar in the basement, and they're having a great time. And they say, "Briggs!" He stopped, he said, "My name is not Raymond Briggs." Everybody knew his name was Raymond Briggs. He says, "My name is Jim Carney. I'm from Paw Paw, Michigan." And he had to explain what he did. His father did find out right before he shipped overseas who he pretended to be and who he really was.
So,
That's my favorite story.
so what was the date that you started your service? And during that time, what were some of the jobs that you did during that time?
I was enlisted on on the 20th of October, 1949, and my first bad experience was to get called at KP, like 4 o'clock in the morning. Get over there a little late, and you're getting the worst job in the world, cleaning out the grease traps. I don't suppose Mr. Slovak never got into KP.
Yes, I did. We all did.
When I went to Virginia to this plumbing school, I got there a month early, and my job mostly was KP. So, and then they pulled the rug out.
So, can you explain the process that took from you going from KP into serving into the Korean War? Like, what was the process that you had to go through in order to get to that point in your life?
Well, they trained us in the classroom, and I think that what they should do is send them to the emergency rooms of the hospitals, and then they would be trained for trauma, which that is something we saw a lot of. Because if a person steps on a landmine, he blows off his foot. Well, you see stuff like that in the emergency room, but you are not conditioned for that. So you go by the seat of your pants. So I had my one medic that was in the platoon coughed up a worm one day, and he had to be evacuated and be treated for that, and he came back. So he was fine. The worm didn't eat much.
Can you list off any medals or awards that you received during your service?
Well, I got the Good Conduct Medal. I got the Korean War medal with 3 battle stars, and other than that, I got the marksman. I got the marksman award. They had to ship me through twice in order to qualify.
You told us before during our pre-interview that you also received the Purple Heart and
Yes.
the Bronze Star. How did you receive those?
I got the Purple Heart. I was very akin to listening, and I knew that these guys, they were shelling us, and I was waiting for a casualty to come down on the hill, from the hill. And they walked the mortars up, and I knew it was going to come into by us. And I laid down, and the guy who was standing by a tree over here was a captain, smoking a cigarette. And I thought, you are good. You should get down. But you don't talk to an officer like that. When an officer speaks, you answer. You never ask a question. So it came in, landed next to him, killed him just like that. And I got just a small wound in the back. And I went down to the aid station and I said, don't you tell this out and don't publicize this, because I don't want my mother to know that this happened. And he didn't. He was a pretty good friend of mine. Even though he was captured after I left, and he died in a POW camp.
Can you list any of the bases that you were stationed at, and some of the things that went on at those places?
I was first in Fort Riley, Kansas, and went to Fort Eustis, Virginia. We call it Fort Useless. And that's where I took the plumbing course. Then they sent me to Fort Lewis, Washington. And when I came back after 9 months in Korea, I went to, they give you a choice of where you wanted to go. So I said, I want to go the East Coast, New York, if possible. And I was on the island of Manhattan, not at Manhattan, I'm sorry, Long Island. And we were just about a half an hour from Times Square. It was beautiful 18 months.
Were there any people that you met during your time at those places that might have influenced you and given you better perspectives on your life?
I was very fortunate to have good friends in the service. I keep in contact with one of them yet. He's in Michigan. We had a call to send a platoon out to rescue the artillery outfit, which was surrounded by the Chinese. And when they got there, the Chinese had already taken the artillery, and they also took these 34 guys from my company, and out of the 34, only 17 came back. The rest of them died in the POW camp because the North Korean guards were terrible. One guy said, if I didn't eat the soup with the maggots in, I wouldn't get any protein. Now that's something I think you ought to see if you could get across to the kids. Ask them if they like maggots in their stew.
So what was some of the training that you had to go through during your time at these forts?
Well, you mean down in my plumbing experience? Or we just trained, in the medical company, we just trained jokingly, putting bandages on all these guys and putting foot splints on them and bandaging their head. And that's why I really believe that they should have a time that they should spend at least. Like my brother spent about 12 weeks at Fort Sam Houston, and he was sent to a tech hospital, but he had some. I think he had some tough times, and he didn't talk about the service much.
So how was the process of being shipped to Korea, and what were some of the thoughts that were going through your head as you were making that journey to Korea?
The hardest thing to find out was to dig a foxhole deep enough and wide enough to lay down in it, and chop up little pieces of pine to line up the bottom of the hole. I didn't realize this, but my platoon leader was an alcoholic, and he had me answering the telephone, letting him sleep, and taking calls that came in. So I went to see my doctor friend, and after about 4 weeks of that, and he pulled me out and he said, you're not going to go back until they get this straightened out. And I went back, and he never asked me to do that again, and he never talked to me again. And they finally, after being drunk in combat, the platoon leaders got all together and they got rid of him.
So what was the morale for the rest of the troops as you were approaching Korea? Was the morale high, or how was it?
We had a few World War II veterans, and they were very good. They didn't say, "You haven't seen anything yet." They would be shooting balloons off the end of the ship so they could practice, but I don't think there's any way you could prepare yourself for a war.
So where was your station when you came to Korea? Where were you stationed?
We went from here, Busan, all the way up to about here, 18 miles. And the Chinese came in. We didn't know they were there, and they about wiped my division out.
So what year did you go to Korea?
1950, got out in April of 51. I did like Mr. Slovak did here. I used the GI Bill and have paid back it in income taxes year after year after year. A nurse suggested I go on to school because I was working at a VA psychiatric hospital, and I was doing her work because I had learned a lot, and so she found out where I should go, and I went there, and that's where I met my wife. There's a 16-to-1 ratio, girls to guys.
So going to the experiences during the Korean War, what was your mentality during the battles, and is there anything that happened that might have deeply affected you and probably has remained to you to this day?
I was up on 42nd and Broadway in New York City with a few of my friends who had never been in combat. And some kid came by with a big balloon like this and banged that. And they said, "What are you doing down there on the sidewalk?" Reflex action. I couldn't explain it, but it happens. It just happens. It still does happen. You get that loud bang and you really react. I can't stand loud noises.
So what was the environment like as you were stationed out in Korea? What was the the environment and the weather, and how did that affect your group?
I remember we had a storm one night, and three of us sitting in a foxhole with about 18 inches of water and laughing our heads off. But the snow was probably the worst, the cold weather.
And so how did you persevere through that environment?
I had 5 layers of clothes on, and we had just count out layers and layers, and you know, I think if you followed directions and change your socks every day and you know, your canteen cup and your canteen's full of water, it would be frozen the next morning. As I was telling Mr. Slovak that my favorite food was pork and beans, and I think I ate them practically every day. I'd trade. They also taught everybody how to smoke. Everybody got a pack of cigarettes in their rations, 1 pack a day.
So can you go through the process and the mentality that you had as this war was going on? Did anything change from being at a high morale rate and then just wanting to be done with it as soon as the years went by?
I think my dad was glad to see me go to school because I had been in a couple of car accidents. And it was a good thing. My brother did not take advantage of his GI Bill. He went to work on the railroad, and he said, "You better go back to school." So
what was the process of, and where did you stand in the process of retaking back North Korea during this time of the war? So what effect did you have that basically combined with everything else that was going on around you? What was your major part that you played, the role that you played?
I was sitting in a bar the day that the North Koreans came across the border, and I heard an older gentleman say, "Well, here we go again." And I thought, does he know what he's talking about? In 6 weeks or a month, we were there. It was one of those things that, but nobody is prepared for, especially the younger guys. They're not prepared for that. It's one thing you have to enlist. Would you like to go enlist? And
Me, not personally, but
no,
maybe in the future if something changes.
yeah. Hard to answer a question like that. You just can't.
Was there any communication with your family and friends back in the States?
My mother collected all my letters and kept them for me. I still have them. And I never wrote her and told her what was going on. I was sending letters to a gal that I graduated from high school with, and when she kept them, and then when she was going out with this guy pretty steady, she burned them. And I told her everything that was going on. But it was one of those things that I didn't want to antagonize anybody at home. I didn't tell them what was going on.
So did you, with that mentality of keeping the violence and everything that happened to yourself from your family, was there anything that might have triggered during that time in the war, that bottling up all those emotions that you had, did anything end up releasing during your time in the war?
There was a fellow, he was from a class 2 years behind me, and he was sent to Korea with the Task Force Smith. And Task Force Smith just about got wiped out, and he was one of them, and they never found his body. And that's the thing. Tough.
So, moving on after that, what was the process that you went through after returning back from the war, transitioning into your young adult life, and being to be back as without having that behind your back?
One thing I found out is if I went into a bar at home, they'd serve me. They never asked my age. And that was the way it was. If you're old enough to serve, you're old enough to have a beer.
So,
yeah,
did your college life have any effect? And after you went back to school, was there anything that felt different as you returned, transitioning from what you knew about your life before the war and then after the war? Was there any perception that changed?
I think you have to say, don't take yourself too seriously. We were married and had 2 kids, and I couldn't make it on a nurse's salary, so I went back to anesthesia school. And my wife worked during the day. We had a babysitter, and it worked out fine. I met a lot of wonderful people, wonderful doctors. I could go from on my days off to other hospitals and give anesthesia.
So during the 1950s, what was your life like during other conflicts that started happening during that time with other elections and other things like that? Did your life have any changes, like to sort of progress with the times as times was going on?
I wish I was 18 years old again. I would probably change a lot of things, but that's not possible. I think I try to treat people the way that people would treat them the way that you treat people.
So during the 1950s, we saw a rise of like suburbia and just the suburbanization of the country. So did you find yourself in the middle of that, or were you conflicted towards the things that were changing around in society?
We were in the 50s. I was and it was a very sheltered situation. I went to a school that cost me only $350 for 3 years of room and board, and you just had to work hard. That's all. And I had a great time. I can't actually. I was in the reserves, and they were calling back nurses. They were talking about dropping nurses in to combat situations, and I said, I was a captain at the time, and I said, I can't do this again. So I resigned my commission.
So how did you meet your wife?
Well, she was the best looking one in the class. No, she was she's a good same religion as I had, and her mother liked me. Her dad liked me. Give me a shot of plum brandy. So, you guys never had plum brandy, I'm sure.
So after your college life, were there any hobbies that you took in during your time, just being able to be yourself and be with your family?
Have you got half an hour? No, I can't say to change anything.
So as the times went into the 60s, was there anything that changed with the election, like with Kennedy and other things that were happening with other stuff that happened with like the Cuban Missile Crisis? Was there any
Yeah.
opinions and things that happened inside your family that sort of remain with you right now?
I think the music changed so much. And my mother couldn't stand music that was on the radio in the 40s with the big bands and so forth. And I wonder what she'd have thought had she listened to Elvis and all the rest of these guys were twanging away. And I think there's good music should come back.
So with that, the boom of the rise of the pop and with Elvis and all the other greats, was there any social changes that happened with you? That were you going to the clubs more, or were there other social events that happened that you were participating in?
My kids were affected like that. They liked that music, and all I have to do is turn it off my radio right away when I start the car. Yeah, a lot of changes. Shoulda, coulda, woulda.
So were there any career changes that you might have went into besides your experience with nursing? Was there anything else that might have happened in your life that different career paths that you might have went into to experiment with and maybe didn't like?
I worked in Stoughton, Wisconsin, and my administrator, I didn't realize it, was an alcoholic. And my other partner was leaning that way too. And so after covering for them when they were out of town, couldn't get back because of the fog, I got a call to go to Bad Axe, Michigan, which we did. And it was, yeah, I was the director of nursing at this hospital, and I got things done which probably should have been done a long time before. But they had somebody who was, we had nurses that had a big RN here, and they had never gone to school. And it was a case of of neglect of the director of nursing. I could see where there's a lot of room for improvement.
So during the pre-interview, you told us about the psychiatric hospital that you were working at for a while. Can you tell us a little bit about the experience there and some of the stuff that was sort of prominent with you?
Tranquilizers were just coming in. And I would go to work, and these guys would be hanging on the bars, and they'd be yelling out the window. It was sort of like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. If you ever saw that movie, that is exactly the way the state hospital was. But I worked in a federal hospital, and after a while, it was quiet because they were overdosing these patients. It was quiet. I actually applied to get back there, but it took a long time to get my application through, so I decided to go into working at the TB hospital here in Milwaukee. There was one out at Murdale, it's out by the county grounds. So, yeah.
So with your children, is there anything that you did to help them pursue any careers that they had and anything that they had?
I have to admit, I probably was so stick in the mud. Marijuana was just coming in really full blast, and I said to my kids, I said, if I catch you with marijuana, I said, that'll be the end of your college education. Guess what? I found marijuana again. And I'd read a lot of bad things about marijuana and how it affects your sperm and so forth, all that stuff. So, and I said, you just cooked it. And so they put themselves through college, and you know what? They took me down to New Orleans to the big World War II exhibition down there. If you ever get a chance to, go down and see it. So, and I put the other two girls through. They were fine.
So, being a war veteran, was there any sort of sympathy and empathy that you held for the other pressing conflicts that would happen after your service? Was there anything that was that you had I guess opinions, or not opinions, but that stuck with you and you thought about while your life would proceed on to this day?
I'm glad we didn't go to another World War. As far as our situation which we have now, I think every person should spend at least 2 years either working as a prison guard or some social service or the Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force. And I knew people that in World War II, one guy was blind in one eye, and he still had to serve. So,
being a person that has went through a lot, and as the times were going on, and you were sort of overseeing everything that would proceed after the war, was there anything that you thought about that would sort of relate back to your own personal life that affected, and did you have to change yourself or your family to proceed with those times?
That's a tough question. I believe in marriage, and I see a lot of the people play house, and they could care less about what their parents would say. That's that, and as far as legalizing marijuana, I don't think that the jury's out on that yet. It's still, because there's a lot of bad things that, and in fact, there was a woman that gave marijuana to her baby. Can you imagine that? Not every mother is God sent. And maybe I'm getting on a political stump right now.
That's okay. So, coming now to the present, is there sort of a new mentality that you have that you might not have had during your younger years? And is there anything else that you would like to say?
Well, I'm very impressed with my sons. They turned out to be very good. My one daughter lives in Alaska, and she's divorced, and she's married another real nice guy, and other than that, I think our family is pretty solid. I like to read good books, and if I can supply you with any good books, I would be more than happy to. I hope they haven't run it on tape. Last
So-
question?
I think so. So this will be a question for both of you. If you can look back to your past self and basically your youth, and what would be something that you would want to tell to your past self?
Ed?
Well, I consider myself when I was growing up, because I'm a depression baby, just like John is, and coming out of the depression, we had to go through a lot of different kinds of things. We did survive, and we're doing well, but there's so many opportunities there that we never had during the time that we were growing up. Had we known about these things earlier, and did we have all the resources to do that? Because we never had enough. As I always said, we were never poor and we were never rich, but we did have enough money. Now, how do you explain that? I don't know. That's through a lot of determination that we all had to survive and do things. And had we had the opportunities like they have now, we could have done much better for ourselves, but we did make use of the things that we did have, and that has improved considerably. So this is the thing, the opportunities are there now for a lot of the young people, for all people, and we're at the dawning stage of our lives now, which is a little different for other people, such as the three young people that are here with us today.
I think that what people could do is to provide more scholarships for kids. For some of these families have kids that are so smart. I don't know if do you watch Jeopardy and see that guy that's on Jeopardy?
I think so.
He's a guy who's at 4 years old, he could spell, I mean, he could add and so forth. And he's a very, very, very smart person. He's up toward almost $2 million in his winnings. So there's a lot of those people that are still out there who, if they had the chance to go to school and make it available for them. I've sent some money to my old high school because it was a high school that sent the least kids to college. I feel very strong about that. Okay?